all, and welcome to the Verdict podcast. We have a very, very special guest for you today, and our co-host Ed Dempsey is here in full force. I am Linus Leo Lampe, the Triple L, and here we go. Before we start, I just want to plug a few things for the Law Society. They are looking for budding debaters. So the Law Society is starting a debating club, and we are hoping to get as many people as possible joining that. We have today a very special guest who's going to introduce himself now. He is a very big health advocate, as you can see by the cigarette in his mouth. Nick Clark, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello. I haven't done many of these, so I'm not an expert yet. But thank you very much for the opportunity to be heard by you wonderful young students of the Exeter University. And hopefully this will be a fascinating and interesting conversation between the three of us.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, so I think it is going to be. So Nick, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself? Just start from the beginning. Where are you from? Where were you born?
I was born in Maidenhead, but I don't remember any of it. I didn't live there. I was born in 1975, to give you some contextual idea of where I sit on the timeline of culture. 70s, I was a baby, so I don't really have any memory of that. In the 80s, I lived in a village called Martin near Salisbury, and we lived in an old thatched cottage. And I went to a school called Sandal Manor in Fordingbridge, which was like the X-Men Academy.
How so?
Well, it was just a classic, beautiful private school with wonderful people, wonderful teaching, boarding from the age of very young. I boarded from about 11, 12, I think. And I had some of the most wonderful times and best friends one could ever dream to have of. Sorry for the poor English there. It was, looking back especially, they were really halcyon days of innocent perfection.
All right.
Then,
what did you, sorry to interject, what did you think about boarding? Because your opinions on boarding are quite unusual in a way, because loads of people who are boarded at a young age tend to end up loathing their parents for it. What were your opinions of boarding at a young age?
Looking back, when the oratory was when I really got into the boarding, and that's where boys were bigger. There was far more boisterousness. There was far more bullying. There's 500 or so blokes living in a small, confined environment together in a school for like half a decade. Right. And look at now, since I got my condition, I don't know how I survived looking back. Right. But I did. And when we're young, we're much more resilient, much braver, much more strong. And it's actually a wonderful social scene if you can make it work for you. The first 3 years of the oratory, there was quite a lot of bullying. It was quite hard. And yes, there were times where I'd be weeping to my parents on the phone as a 14, 15-year-old boy, saying, I don't ever want to come back to this school again, right? But I had no choice. My parents insisted I go. I do not resent them for it at all. If I'd gone to a state school, I probably would have flunked my A-levels, because there were a lot of people who left the oratory in my year after the GCSEs. And all of the ones who left, including the bright ones that went to the local Henley College, they all flunked their A-levels.
Yeah, it's similar. It's similar in my year as well. It's very similar.
Do you know why I think that is?
Why?
That it's not because they're all stupid. It's just that they go from one extreme to another. And I didn't flunk my A-levels because I was forced into that streaming of education. But what I did do badly, and I scraped to pass in the end, but I should have been up for much more, was the course I did afterwards, my film college course, the first 2 years of a BTEC. And because I was out of the loop, at the age of 19, I had freedom for the first time, whereas all the guys who left the oratory felt the freedom of like a state college, a comprehensive education at the age of 16, 17 for their A-levels. And if you've been in one of those tight, almost military boarding schools where discipline and rigor is every day in your face,
and routine,
and you're suddenly thrown out into the world of adults doing whatever they like, It is a party. It is amazing. The freedom is so fresh and new, but a lot of people aren't used to that freedom, and then cock up, which is exactly what I did, but slightly after my A-levels rather than after my GCSEs.
Do you think you maybe didn't get an adequate sort of, you weren't adequately taught how to deal with being in an outside sort of environment then? Or was it more just going wild for the sake of it?
I've always loved the notion of freedom, okay? And I suppose when you're locked up in a boarding school, you have bigger ideas of what freedom is. What I do notice about my boarding is that I still happily sleep at night in a dark room on my own in bed. Right. I think there's a lot of benefits to a boarding school education which aren't on the surface what you go there to get.
No, I agree with you there. You know, you can't put a price on the boarding school culture. I think that something I would say to people is, do you send your kids to a private boarding school to get high academic achievement or to come out a gentleman, or both? And I think that for me personally, I wouldn't consider myself an academic achiever in any light. I did, pretty just above average. But I feel in other social situations and in other activities, I excelled so much, and most of that was down to being at a private school. Hence, as you pointed out earlier, I'm wearing the Windhover tie for public speaking. But I definitely think that the private school, the value for money is with the external benefits you reap from it, not the academic ones.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I used to make a cynical joke when I got a bit older that boarding school is a bit like the Taliban, in that it's very religious, we've got guns, and there's a lot of drugs. Right? The only difference is that they've got the pillars. Right?
Yeah, well, it's true. I mean, people talk about drugs being rampant in poor areas of society, and actually, it's few and far between, because I'm not going to say there's an Oratory or at any of the private schools I've been to, but I know for a fact that drugs are more rampant in private schools than they are in state schools, because the more money there is, the more money people have to spend on substances.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Going off the theme of drugs, do you want to explain to us a bit about your condition and how you came to have it?
Well, I will go off the theme on drugs, but I have to revert to it initially to tell you how I came about this condition, because it was due to drugs. I am actually. I was caught for about a year in loosely the rave scene. If you remember the 90s, you guys are a bit younger, so I don't know how aware you are of the media you've watched as to how big the rave scene was.
Trainspotting.
Trainspotting. I agree with my friend Dom, who said of Trainspotting, it's a desperately unpleasant film about desperately unpleasant people in desperately unpleasant places. Right? I kind of agree with him, because it's not a happy joy film. I much prefer I like action, comedy, romance, good stuff, entertaining, exhilarating, thrilling, positive. Like one of the best films I've ever seen at the cinema in the last 10 years is, funnily enough, X-Men Apocalypse. Right?
There was all these reams of films that I thought you'd say, and that was well at the bottom of the list. Really funny.
It's so well made. It's so exhilarating if you have the suspension of disbelief and get involved in the characters and the story. It is a ripping yarn of cinematic beauty. It really is. I think so. I mean, I like to think I know what I'm talking about with some regard to cinema, because I spent 5 years of higher education in it.
Yeah. But going back to the rave scene, you're explaining your condition. Paint a picture for us of what the rave scene was like. In the
I was never a hardcore raver. I liked to toke a lot because it helped with my creative thinking and my philosophy and my belief system with regard
to... For the viewers, by toke means marijuana. Am I right?
Yeah. But at this time in 1995, I was dabbling with an assortment of chemical things and other things. And 1995 was by a country mile the worst year of my life. Okay. How I got out of it is just by literally a miracle of God. All right. I was living like a wayward sinner. Let's make no bones about it. We went to a religious school. I was a consummate sinner for that year. Okay. I was taking acid, speed, drink, lager, wine, vodka, weed every day. I mean, because I had some money in the bank from when I got beaten up at school by a guy at school, a local comprehensive, a thug, attacked me one day when I was protecting my friend from a racist abuse. And he broke my arm in a fight. It was a bit embarrassing because he was actually a bit younger than me, but he was a thug. Right. Okay. And so I got about £7,000, £8,000 from the government in compensation at the age of 18, 19. And that allowed me to not only buy some video equipment for my course, but also to supply myself with enough drink, drugs, whatever I was going on in my student house, which was a 7-bedroom student house in Bournemouth. And I had some of my best friends living with me and my girlfriend at the time. So and I had a car, I had freedom, I had money, I had everything. So on the surface, you'd think that Nick Clark, he's got it all, right? Worst year of my life for all sorts of reasons, all psychological, all to do with terrible chemicals. The worst by far being LSD if it goes wrong. And the last LSD trip I took, I've had a number of bad trips on LSD, okay? I haven't touched it for 25 years, but it still every day lingers with me as what it can do. And the last LSD trip I took in 1995 was so bad, I can only define it as hell itself, okay? As a want of a description. I spent 10 hours sitting in a chair with one of my best friends on a beautiful summer's day in hell. I have never known any such powerful terror and agony in my mind. I don't even know if it was LSD. It might have been some poison they tried to kill me with or something. You don't know what you're getting when you buy these things from these people. But it was awful. And that was after a heavy year of use of things I was having a difficult year anyway. So it was like the full stop on the end of the hell trip year. And afterwards, I soon started hearing voices. I remember the first time I heard a voice, I went into Thresher's wine shop in Winton High Street. And there was an Asian teller, and I go up to buy a bottle of vodka, and I hear a female American voice say, 10-4, he's on drugs. I look around, I go up to the Asian guy, the poor Asian guy, didn't know what was going on. And I said, is this place rigged by the government? Right? Because a lot of schizophrenics think they're being rigged or they've got surveillance after them or something, because that's what you're experiencing.
So is schizophrenia what you have then? Is that what you're diagnosed with?
That's what I'm diagnosed with. Yeah. I don't think it's a mental illness per se, because I'm not in pain at the moment. I'm not mentally retarded. Sorry, I know that's a terrible word to use these days, but I'm not simple backwards. I'm quite an intelligent chap, but my senses, I think what drugs do is ostensibly enhance the senses. So this is why, if you even just have a mere spliff, the music sounds great. The food tastes great. Love feels wonderful, right? If you believe in God, God feels closer. The senses are illuminated, for want of a word, somewhat. Under acid, it's like mega parsecs beyond. And it can go good. It can go in a good way where you're just laughing your tits off in a field for 8 hours with your best mates, and weird stuff that you can't explain happens, or it can go terribly, terribly badly. And that paranoia, if you know what paranoia is on like a smoke, yeah? Have you ever had that, a YT or something like that?
Yeah. Right. I'm aware of what it is, yeah.
Okay, well, being on acid, if it goes wrong, is like that times a million. Okay. Really terrifying, really painful, really awful, and is the cause of a lot of people going into mental homes. So while I am very liberal on cannabis use for those it benefits, I am not a legalize all drugs kind of guy, a person at all, just because I think they're too dangerous, they're too powerful, and you can end up very quickly in screwed up situations which you would never plan for yourself.
Yeah. Well, this is it's something that drugs seems to be nowadays a topic of extreme interest to both users and non-users. At the same time, being a topic of taboo. If you agree with me there, Ed. But I think that when you talk about drugs, many people seem to talk about the positive side of drugs, that I'm having fun, I'm getting messed up in this club, I'm doing this and that, everyone loves it, everyone's enjoying it. And films around the world, like The Wolf of Wall Street, etc., Pablo Escobar, Narcos, they seem to glorify drugs in some kind of way, both the supply and the taking of it. But as someone that has experienced, the negative byproduct of drugs, Nick, what do you have to say about all that?
All right. Well, I hope I don't offend anyone or annoy anyone, but I think hard drugs are really bad problem. And I say I am an addict myself, right? Not to hard drugs, but I'm an addict to lager and cigarettes and to some extent marijuana. Ideally, I would have never had that first joint at the age of 15, which made me feel like a superhuman god and that all was well with the world and I could save humanity. Right?
Yeah.
I still do feel that way, by the way, when I'm high, but I've realized it's a personal notion.
Yeah.
But what I would say, let me just illustrate to you the evils of man.
Okay.
Cocaine, for instance, has been known, and I know someone loosely in the anti-drugs unit, and the cocaine is like a higher level of severity, if you ask me. It's very expensive, it's very powerful, and you've got to be rich to be able to do cocaine, basically. I was making a joke to someone saying a true junkie is the richest poor person you will ever meet. They hardly have any money, but they've often got money for drugs. And they're expensive things, especially cocaine. Now, cocaine, as well as it makes, yes, you can have a wonderful time. You can feel superhuman and you might get laid. And people will think that's wonderful because we live in godless times where they think getting their end away on narcotics is the pinnacle of human achievement, right? But it's not. In the Bible, in the prophecies, there are 8 hellfire sins, okay? And this is where I didn't want to go too heavy, but I'm going to, because it's important. And I do believe, on the whole, at the end of the day, in the goodness of man and the salvation of man. But there are 8 hellfire sins in the prophecies, which is yet to occur, apparently, if you believe in this, over the future of mankind. And one of them is translated as witchcraft or sorcery. But if you look at the original Greek or Latin, it's actually the word for drugs.
Oh, right.
Right? And cocaine is very immoral drug, if you ask me. Don't get me wrong, I have had sex, okay? But it's not my raison d'etre, it's not my primary focus in life, because I do have a strong moral focus to me, especially these days, after my wayward year where I was just off the rails. I had to take charge of me to survive. Otherwise, I'd end up dead or killed or in deep trouble or in prison. I was just living like an idiot.
Have you ever been to prison, Nick? Were you ever close?
Yes, I have been close on a couple of occasions, but I've never actually been to prison. I've been sectioned once when I was very psychotic.
Okay. What age were you then when you got sectioned?
I was in my 30s, and
Okay.
a part of the reason I was sectioned. This is going to get a bit 18 rated now.
That's okay.
Okay,
Yes.
but I went to the pub. I might have ingested a weaponized airborne narcotic. Okay, that's
Okay.
right. Because I hadn't taken anything stronger than I normally do for ages, apart from red wine. And red wine can exacerbate my psychosis. It's got a chemical in it which I know, so I no longer touch it, right? But it's got a very potent chemical in it which reacts to my mind. I can even hallucinate on red wine.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Wow.
So and so I had a lot of red wine. My parents were away. I was living at their house at the time, and I went up to the pub and I had this terrible experience. And all these voices were telling me things more than normal. And basically, to illustrate the sheer scope of horror that I found myself facing, I was convinced. This was around the time of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and that jazz. I was convinced that dog food available at the local shop was the meat of our enemies in war. Okay. And all these voices were telling me that that's what it was.
Yeah.
Okay. And I was freaking out about this. And I even had an Apache helicopter face me down in my father's paddock. Okay. Now, when I tell people this, they think, oh, you're hallucinating. No, you don't hallucinate things like that. If you hallucinate, a hallucination is a distortion of your visual field where your memory kind of plays a trick. Sorry, not your memory, your consciousness kind of plays a trick and morphs it. Okay. But then it soon clicks back into reality. And you can realize, oh, that was an hallucination. A real-life Apache war helicopter looking down on me over my father's paddock was not an hallucination. I don't know what it was doing. I don't know if they're connected, but I was quite concerned. And then when my CPN came to look up, my auntie came to look after me, she found me drunk in my father's paddock, having just faced down an Apache helicopter, had a cow on the road talk to me saying, how would you like it with regard to eating steak? Been freaked out by the rustle of the trees, thinking there were invisible army ninjas in the trees. And I was standing there with my golden pole, which is just a mop handle, which I'd sprayed gold, telling my auntie that dog food is actually the flesh of our victims in war. That's why I was soon taken away by a mental health professional in a car playing Wagner, Hitler's favourite music, which didn't ease the pain at all.
Ride of the Valkyries. Hey.
It was. That's what we were. That's what we were listening to.
Yeah.
And
if I say it's safe to surf this beach, it's safe to surf this beach.
I love the smell of weed in the morning, Captain. You know what I mean? I mean, I still don't know to this day. A part of me still thinks, is dog food really that? Right? But it was horrible, mate. And to go back further to what I've survived since 1995, being schizophrenic, when I started hearing voices, the 95% of what I would hear were death threats towards me or my family. Right?
How many have you heard? You gave me a number one.
Yeah, over 350,000 death threats from auditory hallucinations because of drugs.
Mm.
It's not big. It's not clever. It can be fun. And the point I would like to illustrate with regard to the wickedness of some of the people in the drugs trade is that some of the hardcore ones will feel no qualms smuggling their drugs in the bodies of children, dead children. Now, I don't know what others think on that, but for me, that is about the summit of devilry, evil.
Well, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know Frank Lucas? Yeah, you know Frank Lucas, Nick.
Well, you'd have to I do not know the name initially, but
Frank Lucas?
No, it escapes my mind.
So Frank Lucas was the distributor of heroin, which in America, which he labeled Blue Magic. The depiction of him in American Gangster, portrayed by Denzel Washington, is fabulous.
Oh, it's him, right? I know that film very well. It's good.
There were many theories about how he got his drugs from Vietnam, the conflict in Vietnam, to the US, and one of them was that he was basically smuggling them in dead veterans' bodies through the funeral service. So that's the knowledge I have on dead body drug smuggling, and I think it's absolutely disgraceful. But Ed, what do you think about what Nick's just said about the dead children?
Yeah, again, I don't think there really is any upside to the drugs trade. I think when you take it as a medicinal sort of thing that can help people, then yeah, it's laboratory factor sort of thing. It's regulated heavily. But when you talk about sort of like every day-to-day people being supplied with heroin, cocaine, as you said, through all these nefarious means, it just gets worse and worse. Like every episode of Border Patrol, there's just people coming up with new ways of getting drugs into a painting or into toys that can't be detected by sniffer dogs or whatever. It's just people trying to do worse and worse things to give people
the Australians,
worse drugs.
The Australians don't let anything through in border control, though.
No, they're really strict on it. I think it's fair enough.
I'm sorry, sir, but this bag clearly contains cocaine. I'm afraid you're going to have to leave the country and never come back.
I was just wondering, Nick, when did you first sort of seek help, or as in when did help first find you after that first sort of like 1995 when everything really went to hell?
Pretty much that I just phoned up my mum one day and said, "Mum, I think I need to see a psychiatrist. I'm not coping with this at all. I'm in so much pain and suffering and agony." And my parents are saints. My parents are saints for what they've had to put up with. So I would like to thank them immediately for their love and their care and everything they've done for me. My parents do not do drugs. They do not watch porn. They do not do crime. They are not corrupt. They are good, decent, solid, successful people. But there's two things I'd like to raise on this. The drugs trade, that film American Gangster, did you notice how they juxtaposed the character of Denzel Washington? Very black. He's a very respectable man, though, isn't he? Mm. Throughout the film, we were on the side of Denzel Washington.
Of course.
Yeah, because the cop, played by Russell Crowe, is a nasty thug who beats his wife.
Yeah.
Or gets rough with her at one point or something.
I think, they're going through a divorce and, stuff said. Yeah.
So it's that character juxtaposition, which is also in itself quite dodgy because we're siding with the hardcore criminal and not the nasty cop, right? I'm not particularly pro. In an ideal world, we wouldn't have cops and drug dealers, really. So I don't know where I stand. I'm an ex-drug user. I've been in trouble with the law briefly for a few things. I've spent 3 nights in cells on 3 separate occasions for 3 separate incidents.
Can you talk about those incidents at all? Or?
One was just drunk and disorderly when I was at film school. I'd taken a lot of vodka and I was dancing on a stage like an absolute twat. The bouncer pulled me down. At first, he asked me to get down and go out. But because I was drunk, young, stupid, I thought, I'm having fun. So I got back up and started dancing like a knob again. All right. And this time, because he'd given me a fair warning, this time he grabbed me, dragged me through the whole nightclub, which was the Opera House in Boscombe. If you know it, you might not. And hurled me out. And I started trying to fight my way free. So I ended up, me versus about 4 burly bouncers. And they chucked me out. I kicked the door in their face. They went, right, call the police. Right? I was off my head, okay? But I was also very upset about being treated this way. And so the policeman came and said, look, mate, just go home. They've asked you to leave. You're off your head. And very foolishly, I gave the police the finger and said, fuck you. Right? And he goes, right, mate, you're nicked. And I was like, oh, well, that wasn't very smart, was it? And so I spent a night in a cell there just to sober up, basically. Another time was over a misunderstanding, which had much more serious connotations when I tell you what happened. But it was over a total misunderstanding. And I would like to reiterate the respect for the professionalism of the British law. When they didn't know what was going on, I didn't know what was going on as a schizophrenic. But what I had I went outside because there was this car rumbling outside my flat many years ago for quite a long time. All right. And I know what the sounds in my area sound like. So if something's different, I can hear it. Yeah. And so I thought, what's that? I'm going to go out. We have a problem with some local lads who are a bit dodgy and dicey. And we have a few issues with some slightly unscrupulous characters. And so I went outside to see if there was some youth causing mayhem. And I had a drink, I had a smoke, and I thought, oh, it would be funny if I put my plastic toy gun in my back.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So that was that. But and let's say, I would tell you this to everyone now. Drugs can be very fun, right? But they make you stupid. You do stupid things on drugs. Yes, it can be fun, but it's stupid a lot of the time. And people who rely and generally have to take drugs are not the brightest. Okay. And so I went outside. I had my it was a $2.99 plastic pistol which I sprayed gold. And there was no one there. I said hello to the neighbours who were getting in their taxi. The taxi was there. It was them. It was an old dear and her husband. And they get into the cab and they drive off. So I turn and go back in. I didn't realise the guy getting in the cab was ex-British military, saw my gun, thought it was real, called the police. The next thing I know, I'm in bed, going to sleep, on the door. Right, I open the door. There's 8 armed military police with machine guns.
God.
Get off for! You know, it was all that. Hands behind your head, right? They thought I was some kind of hardcore terrorist or something, or lone psycho with a lethal weapon. And I was like, whoa, it was a toy, right? And but because I remember being quite jealous of them because they were younger than me and they were allowed to be in positions of responsibility where they could wield machine guns in society. And being in the rifle team at the Oratory, I was one of the best shots in the school. And I thought, you lucky bastards, you get to do this for a job. And I maybe that was a bit wrong of me, but and I remember looking at one of the female policemen, and she was beautiful, and she gave me a lovely smile, and I smiled back, and yeah. But I got into a lot of trouble for that, and I got into a lot of trouble recently for something. I don't want to go into that. It's not the height of crime, but I did wrong. I did something stupid for 3 seconds of loss of control. But that is a personal issue, and it's not the worst crime in the world. But I think it involves someone else, and I don't want to bring her into it.
That's perfectly fine.
That's all right.
But you mentioned loss of control, Ed. We're law students. That's a defence, isn't it?
Yeah, loss of control. That's one of the defences to some of the crimes.
Yeah, immediate, complete forgetting all of criminal law. It's over now. We're on contract. Let's keep going. No, brilliant. But going on the law theme, Nick's mentioned the legalisation and how he feels about that. Most hard drugs, he's against legalisation. What do you think about this, Ed?
I think personally, I look to Portugal, who I think is actually quite a liberal view in the sense that I think drugs should maybe be better regulated, and making them illegal, the taboo of it is actually what sort of addicts a lot of people to it. So I think if it was maybe more heavily regulated and sort of kept under close curtains, because in Portugal they've decriminalised all drugs, but and I think the study showed that their rates, their rates have gone down, so it's working. And Portugal's not a small city; it's not like a microcosm of some area. It's a proper study that we can use for future reference.
If drugs were legal, Nick, would you take them?
Oh yeah. No, I wouldn't touch the psychoactive ones like E's, acid. But if cocaine was legal, I think everyone would be doing it the whole time because it's just so amazing. But the thing is, the next day it's not amazing. The next day it's awful, right? And it causes major psychological ruptures in if you've got a conscience. Okay, but what I would say on this matter is that I'm very pro-legalization of cannabis, not purely because it's just a purely smoking plant. That is part of it, whereas all other drugs are refined and altered in a laboratory, and that's another league altogether. But I would say that cannabis is a gateway drug. And the reason it's a gateway drug is because it's illegal. Because when we're young, 15, 16, 17 years old, you go to a party or you're with some friends, you have your first toke, you don't think, oh, I'm a criminal, I'm breaking the law. You're trying a new experience and you have a wonderful time a lot of the time. A lot of people, the first time they have a smoke, have a wonderful experience. Okay? So that in cannabis being illegal and it being often their first introduction to illegal drugs, the thinking goes, because this is the thinking that went for me, and I'm not alone. Wow, if this is so amazing, what are stronger drugs like? What, the government is oppressing us. Our freedoms are being robbed. We should be able to do what we want, etc., right? And that is exactly the thought process that me and my friends went down. And lots of my friends ended up trying harder stuff, never heroin or crack or much Charlie, but in the rave scene, they do. I know I've got a friend who's done loads of pills, right? And lots of my friends have dabbled with things in the 90s, but now we don't touch any of them generally, apart from a couple of people I know. But lots of my friends who went through that crazy 90s, we're now the most boring, straight, hard-working, you know what I mean? But we still like a toke. And a toke, because a toke is really medicinal for those it works for. Mm. If it makes you paranoid, you shouldn't touch it because that's the pathway to mental ill health. But if it can make you delight in your life and feel philosophically and somewhat religiously more secure in yourself, I can only see it as a really positive thing. Whereas the differential of psychological state on any of the more strong chemical drugs is really quite hardcore, really quite radical. And we don't know what we're doing when we're off our faces at that level. And is it really worth having 8 hours of supreme fun with your best mates, tripping your balls off, if what it's going to result in is years and years of psychological suffering?
Well, the only one to answer that question, Nick, is you.
My answer would be no.
Yeah.
No. And to be honest, a healthy belief in a supernatural higher God has got me through. Because I've given you quite a lot of the dark side of everything I've gone through, the gloom, the horror, the nastiness, the evils, right? But I had one very good thing happen to me. And in 1995, after Glastonbury, where I can't begin to, that's a room for a whole nother topic of conversation.
We'll save that for part 2.
All right.
Yeah.
But I got through this Glastonbury 95, and I got home, and to cut a very long story short, I was terrified just by turning up, I'd caused the revolution, started a war, okay? Because I had all these people for 3 days and 3 nights in Glastonbury following me and talking to me and whispering to me. And it wasn't the schizophrenia. It was really going on, right? And it surmounted on the 3rd day of these gang of lads looking at me. They were trying to make me king as far as I could determine, right? And all these guys were going, whoa! Like this, I'm like, war against who's the fucking there? You know? I didn't know who. I didn't want to kill anyone. I didn't want to hurt anyone. And so I got me and my girlfriend out there. But the experience was so powerful after this 3 days, 3 nights endurance task. I got home and I'm lying in bed thinking, they're going to come and kill me. I just turned up for a party and I've ended up starting the revolution. Right? It was something like that. That was what was going on. And anyway, then my thoughts cleared. And I heard a voice. I was terrified, but I heard a voice like no other I've heard before or really since. And it was much more divine. And it came from a different place where I hear the peripheral voices of the demonic attacks. It came from far more within. And it said one word. And that one word was continue. Like that, right? It was like a voice of God. And I was like, oh, wow. Then the fear dispersed. I wasn't afraid that night after that. Then a couple of days later, I'm going to bed again, and I'm afraid again. I don't know what I did by going to Glastonbury, but something mega has occurred that weekend. And this time I'm lying in bed, and this golden light comes down into my head, okay? Haloed by God. That's what it was. And that is what being an Illuminatus is. That you see, you know, all these pictures in saints with golden light around their head?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had what they had, right? And Illuminati technically means the enlightened ones, right? It's got nothing to do. If you go online looking up halos in religious art, you'll see all sorts of people on YouTube saying it's got something to do with ancient Egyptian sun worship. This is not true. It's absolutely wrong. Okay, that is conspiracy-minded nonsense preaching bullshit about something so divinely profound. And it has been my lifelong lesson to try and convince and persuade people that what I'm talking about with regard to authentic divine illumination is the real deal, in place of all this conspiracy nonsense, like, the world's being run by shape-shifting lizard alien Satanists, right? We went to a very elitist school, right, didn't we? We had the best starting opportunity. We mixed with the greatest and the good of all the world, didn't we?
Well, yeah. Well,
To some extent, in a microcosm.
Okay. We were in a. I don't know who was your headmaster, by the way, at the time.
Was it
Dieter?
Who?
Dieter. What's his name?
Never heard of him. We had Barrow for a while. We originally had Block, Mr. Snow.
Okay, so not Dieter, but
no.
I mean, look, when my experience of school was, I got opportunities to, meet with people that were high up in corporations, people who were high up in government. We had Jacob Rees-Mogg. That was brilliant. And we met some people, but I wouldn't say we were necessarily hanging around with the elitist of society, because you got pop stars, movie stars, corporation heads, and then you've got that next level up. You've got the devils like Epstein, you've got the Clintons, you've got all these people. I think you've got to break it down into those different groups.
All right, so you're saying like the mega rich? A tier yet beyond.
The people that you'd have to have like $1 billion to even entertain running into.
Right. Okay. Well, I don't know anything about them either, really.
That's why they're the 0.001%. But yeah, just a quick one.
Go on.
I've just got to say this. Flamank, we are sponsored by Flamank Society. Please get in contact with them about the debating SOC. They're really looking for people to get involved and head on with this thing. Also, Emmanuel and Patricia have started up the Public Speaking Society. Please find them on Instagram. You're listening to the Verdict podcast with the Triple L and Ed Dempsey. Thank you very much.
On the note of the Flamank Society, the memberships are live. I think when this goes out, it'll be at this point. They're £10. It's a very great society to be a part of. It gets you included in a lot of things, and I'd highly recommend being a member.
That's our vice president, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. Not just because I'm vice president of the society either. I do genuinely think it's a great society.
You'll find the links to all that in the description and at the end of the YouTube video. Right, Ed, you've got a quote from Nick Facebook.
So I've got some quotes here, but I think there's one that stands out to me when I read it, and it's very, I think, succinct in what you're trying to say. It's on the 9th of August on your Facebook, you posted, "I met a feminist recently. He demanded equal rights to men. So I smashed her face on and said, 'There you go, love.'" I was just wondering what your thoughts on that one were.
That was a joke.
Right.
Okay, that is just my sense of humour. Look, I love women as much as any man, right? But I'm not really into gender politics, so I don't get it. I think politics is for politics, not for what you do as a person necessarily. Well, that sounds stupid. But that was just a joke. It was just a joke.
Okay.
I do not lash out at people unless I'm attacked, and apart from once, and I got in trouble for that. But what I am sick and tired of in this modern world, and I'll put myself on the line because I don't mind, but because I really see it as a social threat, and that is all this obsession with immorality, for want of a word, right? I think we're
explain what that means.
Well, I think there are many in our generation who have no thought, conception, thinking about, or anything to do with God, because we are hugely a secular-based nation now, and our education system is hugely secular. Now, the problem I have is that I'm not stupid, okay, to believe in God. I know the Genesis legend is a little simplistic for the levels of evolutionary wisdom we have now, right? But I know through personal revelation there is a higher supernatural force. Whether it's halos, voices telling me things from higher planes or lower planes, whether it's being met by aliens or angels, angels and aliens could be synonymous with the same thing, by the way. Yeah. And I've researched the Bible quite extensively, and the Bible and angels really could be creatures from outer space, right? And I say this because I've met two once. And I'd had a joint, nothing new there, nothing new at all. But I was sitting in my flat on my own, as is usual, and I felt really at one. Okay, there's something going on. I can't explain it. I don't know what, but there was an energy. And I looked down on the lip of my computer, and there was my cigarette dust had fallen into a shape that resembled a star constellation, right? So I thought, oh, that's interesting, actually. I'm going to take that photo. So I took its photo, I put it into Photoshop, I blew it up, so I made the contrast of the blacks and whites more, so it looked even more like a star constellation. And for some reason, when I was under the influence of this hash, I put a blob on one of the stars and put an arrow to it, okay? I don't know why, right? The next day, I woke up, I couldn't shift it. I thought, that is really interesting. I wonder if that constellation corresponds with a legitimate star constellation. Yeah. So I went to my ex's father's house, who was a Christian scientist, and he's not a stupid guy. He puts satellites into space, okay? And he's a Christian. And I said, do you have a star chart I could borrow? And he went, yeah. And he gave me this star chart, and it was covered in blobs and colors of stars. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to take ages to find a patch, okay? But I scanned, and I found an almost direct patch almost immediately, okay? And it was uncanny. I photoed that and incorporated it on top of the photo I'd taken of the Ash constellation, okay? And the one that I'd added a blob to and put an arrow to, on the star chart, there was a dot within a dot on that star. And I learned by looking at the key that a dot within a dot on a star chart denotes a binary star system.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And this is how I found Nu Ceti, NU-CETI, okay? And Nu Ceti is off the Phoenix constellation, I think. My memory's hazy on the exact details. And I thought, my God, that's amazing. So I went on Google Heavens or Google Sky, whatever it is, and I zoomed into the planet that was meant to be Nu Ceti. And they've got a picture of a star with it looked like a blue planet in front of it. And I was like, oh my God, I've discovered a new planet of water, right? But apparently it's a colder star in the same solar system as the biggest star. So that's a binary star system. Like in Star Wars, Luke Skywalker's planet Tatooine, it lives in one. Yeah. And then I'm going to bed, and I'm having a fag in my bedroom one night, and I open my eyes. I'm not on anything stronger than I would normally take, certainly no psychological hallucinogens or anything like that. And I see a yellow wisp appear in my hallway, and it floats into my room, and it expands to two humanoid shaped and sized beings of light, okay? And they were featureless, but they were made of blue light, and I could see through them, but they were definitely present. And the nearest of the two leaned forward and did that. He flicked my cigarette, and it immediately hit my hoodie and immediately burst into flames. And I had to pat out the flames in bed, all right? And then they were gone, right? And I'm just like, oh my goodness, what was that? Who was that? Right? It was mind-blowing. And And I don't know if it was because, by the way, have you heard of SETI, the organisation on Earth?
Search for extraterrestrials.
Yes, the search for extraterrestrials. So basically, NU-SETI is actually a place in space. And it shares the name with SETI to some extent, which is to do with intergalactic communications. And I saw it, and it changed in one vision everything I've thought about of life, altered. I knew it wasn't a hallucination because I'm sorry, I've hallucinated on the past in very strong chemicals, and however bad it gets, you do not have telekinesis involved, as in the cigarette being pushed by a light force.
Yeah.
So, and it made me think about light, and can light be concentrated and intelligent itself? I mean, I've gone on to all sorts of crazy thinking because of this. But basically, I think the lesson was, obviously, they don't like me smoking cigarettes because they care. They're angels of God, seemingly, from the cosmos. I think they really do care. And Hollywood often gives the narrative that intergalactic beings, if you believe in them or if you've had anything, they're the enemy. Do you know what I mean? Whereas if
very much that we come in peace sort of, but then they attack you. It's very
the classic Independence Day formula.
Women
and children screaming.
Mars attack, all sorts of them. I've seen one program on TV which I think was a really wholesome look at modern
X-Files.
Well, X-Files.
Yeah.
No, too paranoid, conspiracy laden. You might laugh because some people think it's really cheesy, right? But I think it's a wonderfully sweet American program that deals with modern spirituality, and it's called Touched by an Angel. Have you heard of it?
No.
I've heard of it. I've never seen it.
It's really cool. It's a really nice program, and the essence, the idea is each story is a different story each week. And it's about God infused possible angel beings and stuff like that. It's a lovely, moral, heavy, but good yarn program. I'm not a regular advocate of any TV program, but what I've seen of Touched by an Angel, I was nicely surprised about, and I would happily watch another episode. But Hollywood, I think, could be mentioned in the prophecies of the Bible itself.
Whereabouts?
Go on.
Back it up.
How schooled are you on the Book of Revelation?
Schooled enough to understand what you're talking about.
All right. So, do you know there's a body in the in the Book of Revelation called the Synagogue of Satan, the Jews who say they are Jews but are not and are liars?
No, we never got it. Is that something we would have been taught at Oratory, Nick?
No. Look, put it this way: when I went back to the Oratory to see how it was doing, I met the new priest, and we got chatting. And he seemed like a very nice man. I can't remember. This was a few years ago, so I think he's already changed anyway. But he was the priest at the time in the noughties at some point. And I said, "Oh, I'm studying the Book of Revelation," and this is a priest, right? A man of God. And he said, "Don't read that book, Nicholas. It's very dark." So there's a man of God telling me not to read the Bible. And I'm thinking, what? So anyway, I ignored him completely because I have my own visions, because visions are not hallucinations. Are you aware there's a distinct difference?
Yeah.
Not a lot of people know there is a difference. And
there's a fine line between visions and hallucinations. I have visions all the time. I'm happy to say it. Some of the raps I've written actually like half asleep, in my sleep, woken up, found them on the page, not remembered writing. I believe strongly in visions now.
What have you seen?
It's mostly, my parents would be the first to tell you that I'm quite a self-orientated person, but there's mostly been visions of me in the future. Quite a few of them as well. Have you ever been in a social situation, and felt like you've been there already, and felt like you've lived out that social situation?
Deja vu.
Yeah, deja vu. I get that all the time. In fact, sometimes my brain just comes with an automatic response, as if it's got a script in his head of how the conversation is going to go, and it just bangs to bangs to bangs. And then I actually have to clarify after what's been said, because I just already had that conversation before. So my brain wasn't actually even listening to what's been said. It was just rattling off what I knew was going to happen. Really weird. And it gives me shivers when it happens, because I'm like, whoa. And what I think has happened is I've just dreamed about that social situation in some form, maybe not to the exact T that it's been, and it's just, my brain's just remembered it. It's really odd. Is that, what do you mean by visions? What do you think visions mean?
Well, what I mean by vision is the way I used to differentiate it is an hallucination is like your visual feed with CGI morphing on top of it, right? Or in it, immersed in it, right? Whereas a vision is like someone layers a short animation film over your visual normal thing, and you see it's like an awake dream, but it's fleeting. Okay, I'm not going to tell you what of all the things I've seen, because one is just so scary that I'm not. If I mention it, it almost exacerbates the likelihood of it happening, and I'm not prepared to do that. But okay. I've had a lot of scary visions, which you might be. This is interesting. Because I got some of these visions, and they're quasi prophetic, right? They might be prophecies, I don't know. Okay, until they happen, when and if, right? Retrocausality. Have you ever heard of it?
No. I want to say yes, but no. Retro.
If you could give us like a short explanation.
Absolutely.
Past.
Sort of. You can work it out using etymology, but this is a rare word, and it's only been used. Not many people know it is even an idea. Well, but when I have I've been affected by retrocausality, but when I realised it was what it was doing, what was happening to me, I called it future projection. But when I explained to someone what future projection was, they Googled it and said, "Oh, this is already a thing called retrocausality," right? And it's a very little known or discussed philosophy or idea or theory where events in the future affect the present or past, right? So I would say all Christians, to some extent, are affected by retrocausality if they take the prophecies of Christ and the book, what it says, seriously, okay? Because the book of Revelation is meant to be a prophecy, a long-term prophecy for the future of humanity. And if you read that and believe it, even once, if you read it and believe it, you're affected by the past, talking about the future in the present, okay? Now, imagine you're also getting prophetic visions. Even one is enough to create a retrocausal experience. And I've had a few, most of them are quite scary or daunting, and they have altered the way I approach reality or look at day-to-day things or think about life in general, as though they might be what-ifs that are going to occur later down the line. And that is basically called retrocausality, and it is a thing. It does exist.
But can't you just say, like, isn't that just ambition? Okay, no. because let's say, okay, I'm ambitious, all right? I want to create a cutting-edge company of the future that's going to change everything, okay? If I then take those steps, because I've had a dream about this, I'm taking those steps to create that company. This company has the potential of changing the future. The future, therefore, has a way of affecting the present.
Yes, but that's more like projected wishful thinking in doing what you dream to do. Okay. Retrocausality is slightly more specific in that it's like an actual thing yet to happen is having an impact in the now or the past.
I'd say, Linus, you're explaining sort of forward thinking on a small scale, whereas retrocausality, as I've understanding it from your explanation, is there's a definitive event in the future which you know is going to happen, and it's affected how you've thought about the present.
That's exactly right.
Not to make a joke out of it or anything, but are you talking more of like a Back to the Future kind of vibe here?
Not so much. I mean, do you believe prophecy is real?
It takes a lot for me to believe in something. Being at Catholic school all my life, I've gone in and out of belief. At some stage in my life, I did believe prophecy is real, but now I'm skeptical. I was confirmed a Catholic, but whether or not I still am, it would be hard to say. I still go to church. I enjoy church purely because I used to be a choir boy. I love the Latin, all of that. But whether I believe in all of it is different. Like you're someone that said, okay, when I had this trip, it was literally hell. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now, what do you think heaven and hell is a real place?
Through my analysis of the Bible, it's complicated, right? And
not through your analysis of the Bible. Forget the Bible.
I understand fully the classic modern notion that heaven and hell are kind of in your mind. Okay, so you can be in one state of mind and you can be in hell.
That's
right?
what I believe.
Right, or you can be in another state of mind and you can be heavenly. Okay, and like super cosmic powers and wonderful sensations, right? But if we look at the Bible, do you know heaven is basically space?
Okay.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? And so this is a part of Christianity that you're not taught. Okay, what I'm about to tell you. This is after extensive research into what the whole big fuss is about in the first place. I thought I'm going to find out about this, okay? Everyone's going, Jesus, you have to do this, do that, right? Oh, I'm going to research what it's about. And I did, and I went to town on the matter. So much so that according to the Zulu principle, I'm now one of the world's leading authorities on the apocalypse. Would you believe it? Right? It's not something you can get a master's in per se, but it's true. Anyway, the point of mentioning all this, in the future, if the prophecies are right, there's going to be a place that comes to Earth from space called the New Jerusalem, and it's massive. It's 1,500 miles long, wide, and tall, okay? According to the prophecies of St. John the Divine, who was one of the most powerful men in religion who ever lived. He's not raved about by many. He's not really talked about by many, but it's because of his last book of the Bible that Christianity has been so successful. It's like drugs. It's like weed being illegal and therefore a gateway drug, right? Without the book of Revelation in the Bible, I don't think Christianity would have taken off. It's the special effects. It's the James Cameron. It's the George Lucas. It's the sci-fi.
I love that. I love that analogy. Just like bring it into the film industry is brilliant.
Well, I do because the Bible is a story about characters. Yeah. And films are it's a story about a person. Yeah, ostensibly. But St. John the Divine just took it to a level like Islam doesn't really have prophecy, nor does Judaism, nor does really Buddhism. I don't think. I've studied some of them in some depth, right? Christianity and Hinduism doesn't really. Christianity is the one religion with quite an extensive, complicated prophecy for the fates of the world that isn't meant to be based on fiction, right? And it was all written down by St. John the Divine, who's the only disciple of Christ not to meet a gruesome end. Right? So if these 12 people who all died, well, 11 people who all died for knowing this man, Jesus Christ, who I don't believe is fiction. I believe that's part of communist inculcation, is to teach you that Christianity is fiction. Okay, I think it's more than that, much more than that, right? And if you've got 11 people who all died for knowing this dude, apart from one who wrote a book which just blew the world apart, right? Then I'm interested in that. I'm like, wow, what's going on? And if you read the book of Revelation, it is terrifying in places. The scope of horror for mankind, seemingly, we haven't even touched on the surface yet of what might happen. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And there's a...
So you're talking about the book of Revelation, right? Mm. So you're saying that this book within the Bible basically sold the Bible?
I would say it is a huge reason for people's biblical and religious hysteria.
But why?
Because of what it says in the Bible, in the book, right?
Because of the horrific implications it has for our future.
Yeah, but ultimately, long range. Don't get too worried. Long range, ultimately, a countless number of all cultures are saved forever. Okay, so that's the good thing, all right? But we've got to go. There's going to be a period in time, again, if it's factual, who's to say it isn't, right, where things are going to get jolly dicey for a lot of people, right? And it's down to not having God in their lives, I think, a whole lot of the time, right?
Humanity is a joke with the longest punchline in the world. I absolutely love that quote, Nick. Do you want to explain your reasoning behind that? I think it's brilliant.
Although I am a believer, one of my favourite books when I was a boy to read was Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah.
It was wonderful. It is a wonderfully clever, funny book. And it was a huge part of how I perceived reality and people and life when I was a younger boy. I was full of comedy as a boy. I used to make people laugh. I used to watch comedies. I had loved so many comedies. And I had a lot of laughs. And Douglas Adams for me was the master of the written gag. But he was always very scathing about humanity. He was always slagging it off, right? Calling us stupid and things like that. And fair enough, right? Because we are pretty weird.
Well, we're stupid. Humans are probably one of the dumbest animals in the world. If you boil it down to, raw factors, of course, we have abilities compared to other animals, but the situations that we put ourselves in society, the crime that goes on, the racism that goes on, discriminating people because of the color of their skin. I mean, you've got to start to think, are we really clever? Are we really the superior beings?
I know what you're saying. But the thing is that with regard to racism, it's such a grey area now, because you wanted to talk to me about Islam. And I do not hate a person for their skin epidermis hue. Let's just get that straight, right? You are born as you are. It's like going up to someone who's got cancer and hating them. Or do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's not under your control. It's just
it's nothing to do with us.
And it's not a bad thing as well. We have to make that clear. Being born of a different color, a different religion, a different circumstance, a different culture, it's not a bad thing. It's a fantastic thing, because it creates a more diverse world, and it creates people with different cultures who can blend together and create something that's more interesting. Imagine if the world was full of Brits. I mean, just imagine that for a second. The food, would be terrible. Everything would be run, badly. There'd be no difference. There'd be no culture. There'd be nothing. The key to life, the key to a happy life, is diversification. Not the same thing over and over.
You might be right. I mean, I personally think some of the worst people I've ever met are the English dodgy under people, underhand people. They're just awful, right? But I am concerned about Islam, because I know the power of.
Why? Explain it in the most politically correct fashion you can muster.
As a Christian, I've met a lot of more, shall we say, zealously enthused Muslims online. Okay, I go to debate rooms. I got chucked out of a big chat room when Pal Chat or whatever it was about a decade ago was the thing before Facebook, and there was a room of many Muslims, and I went in, and all I said was, there was a woman, and I said something like, "Oh, you're nice. Would you like to have a picnic with some wine one day?" It was quite romantic. It was quite sweet, and it had the offering of liquor. And I was barred immediately from all Islamic rooms on that service for that one free comment, because we are much more free, thank God, in the West than they generally are under the more oppressive regimes of Islam. And if we're allowing a whole slew of members of that religion into our nation, it will destabilize us.
Yeah, but I don't. Ed, you go first, and then I'll.
I actually think Islam's quite a beautiful religion in the way that it's practiced. I think the oppressive. Yeah, I think a lot of people take this idea of sort of like jihad to be a really bad thing. And in the context of terrorists, yes, it is. It's awful. They shouldn't do that at all. But it's actually taken as a defense of the faith in more modern terminology. It's defending their faith from people that maybe view it as this awful variation of Christianity, which it isn't. It's its own beautiful religion that's celebrated by generally beautiful people for it. And I think it's actually the Western views a bastardized version of what is generally an advanced. I mean, the Arabic Enlightenment in the 10th, 11th centuries was eons ahead of what we were back then. So we were in the Dark Ages. They're actually it's a very enlightened group of people, and I think including them in our society can't be seen as a bad thing.
Yeah, I totally agree, Ed. And I think further to that, a stark differentiation has to be made between those which practice the Muslim religion and are extremists and terrorists, and those which don't. Because I've had many friends in my life that they consider themselves either Muslim or strong Muslims, because there is a difference, those who follow by the book and those who don't. And all of them have been absolutely lovely people, and have actually taught me a lot about myself and about peace more than I ever could. What do you think about that, Nick?
I agree with you on the surface, because the few Muslims I know I've met in my life, nothing to do with people on TV or media involvement or anything, are lovely people. I don't have a problem with them. There's Nadir, who we call Bob at school. He was like my closest buddy. I shared a study with him for a year. Okay, he's a lovely lad. There's Emran, who I had a great joke with him. He's interesting. All the guys who work at the local fast food are like angels to me, right? I know what you're speaking of when you meet these beautiful people who are very loving and sweet, and I know what you're saying there. It's an attractive quality in a human being.
It's a quality that I am drawn to, because quite often I don't have that quality myself. I can be a bit stern, a bit hard, and a bit rude. but
I think you can be whatever you want to be. If that's the way you want to be, I think you're choosing to be that persona. Personally, I can go for. That's another topic. I do want to mention something though. As a Christian, the fault I see with Islam is they usurp the name of Christ. I know they still claim Christ as one of the prophets and stuff, but Christ in Christianity is the son of God thing, right? Who is Muhammad to a Christian? Okay,
he's the prophet that gave the word of Allah through the Arabic language.
Yes, that's what it is to them. But I mean, for instance, all acolytes of a faith should really embody the behaviour of that whom they look up to. Would you agree?
Yeah, but in terms of Islam, they have that. It's called the Hadith. It's the way that Muhammad lived his life.
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that, Nick.
But then what's the point of a religion? What's the point of following someone like Jesus Christ or Moses if you're not trying to subscribe to their level?
Under no circumstances, let's say my kids wanted to be Catholic, okay? Under no circumstance am I going to tell them that you must follow what Jesus did. You must try to reflect his image as a human being. Of course not. I think that some of what Jesus did is absolutely fantastic. But at the same time, I think some of what Jesus did does not have a place in this modern world and is not transferable. Like something, for instance, like, not having sex before marriage. think, it's just. I think we should live in a free world where women and men have the choice of who they, have sex with.
Well, what if I was to tell you, reverting back to the 8 hellfire sins, which I mentioned earlier.
Okay.
One of which was witchcraft, right? Which I told you meant drugs. Yeah. Another one is sexual immorality. Okay. Now, what does that mean? Right? Does it mean gay? Does it mean promiscuity? Does it mean fornication? Does it mean paedophilia? Right? Does it mean adultery? There's all sorts of different variances.
It's open to interpretation.
Yes, but if you go to the original Greek and look at the word they've translated into the English as sexual immorality, the word in the original ancient Greek is pornoi, or pornoi, okay? Pornography.
Yeah, but what's that got to do with sex before marriage? Okay, pornography. Obviously,
that's sex before marriage on crack.
Yeah, I know. But what I'm saying to you is, okay, women and men engaging in pornographic films is a lot of a line must be drawn between that and Ed's a good-looking bloke. He's in Kings. He's having a good time. He's partying hard, and he meets a girl, and they go on a few dates, and he takes her home one day, and they have sex. There's a fine line.
Yes, I absolutely accept that. And look, I'm a man in the modern world. I've had a few girlfriends in the past, and yes, I have made love to the fair maiden. But I haven't got married for personal reasons, which I'll tell you about another time, right? But my point I was getting to, I slightly digressed onto the sexual immorality thing. But going back to the Islam point is that, are you aware Muhammad was having coitus with a 9-year-old girl?
No, but Emperor Hadrian was also having coitus with a 14-year-old boy.
Back then, lots of all sorts of people were doing all sorts of naughty things with all sorts of people, right? It was, why do we look to history when we were much more moronic and stupid than we are now for the answers of the present?
So I don't want to seem like I'm saying it's not hypocritical, but the same could be said then for looking at the Bible and why you follow the Bible.
I absolutely agree, because if from our knowledge of science in the modern world, and if you look at parts of the Bible, I think a part of the problem is like the KJV is translated into English, but it's like Edwardian, Shakespearean English. When was the last time you went out to the pub and someone said, "Verily, my brother, can't shy by thee a goblet of fine liqueur"? You know what I mean? Which is that was the mode of thinking that Sandalian scholars were in when they translated the KJV. Now, the NIV is a much more modern English up-to-date version that is much more understandable from contemporary parlance, but it's still not perfect, right? So I've given you 2 examples where translation issues from the original Greek in the prophecies can throw a whole different light on what it actually says in the current version, right? Another example would be a nimbus. I told you earlier about my haloing, right? But you'll meet Christians who say, oh, there's no mention of halos in the Bible. Well, actually, they'd be wrong, okay? Again, I'd hate to keep going back to the book of Revelation because there's crowns of life mentioned in James, I think it is, or Acts. And the crowns of life could well be what I'm talking about. But the halo it comes from a word, I can't remember the original Greek, but it can also be translated as nimbus. And in the book of Revelation, they say this angel will come down and shine his light upon the world with a rainbow on his head, okay? But rainbow might not be the right word. It might be halo.
Yeah, there are translation issues with the Bible. I can agree with that, but how does this relate to the issue of Islam and Islam invading?
Not the issue of Islam, but the issues that you've tainted.
Yeah, the issues that you've raised about Islam, rather.
Well, the reason, because ostensibly, Islam, at the end of the day, does define itself in some part as being a war tribe. It has done since its inception under Muhammad, who killed a fair number of people and slaughtered a number of people himself. And that creates the schism Okay, and ideally, in a pure, great world of everyone loving and doing great things to one another, there would be no schisms because we'd all be one, we'd all be understanding. I mean, and don't get me wrong, the Christian church is more schism than Islam in places, right? But schisms occur, and it's because of people's dogmatic insistence that these ancient characters. I mean, like, what really annoys me about all religion is that you can't get a word in edgeways in the modern world as a bright, educated human being if you have your own thoughts about particular matters, right? If you go to a Christian cult place and you say one thing out of turn, they'll turn on you and call you all sorts of things and cast you out. Same for Islam. Same for certain sects of Buddhism and other things. It's a cultural behavior that is based on the them and us mentality.
Well, yeah, I agree with that, Nick, because, you know, Ed already knows this. I'm a strong advocate of freedom of speech. I'm a strong advocate of, you know, criticism where criticism is due and praise where praise is due. Hence why I wrote the song Freedom of Speech.
I'd just quite like to. Really interested in your use of the term "them" and "us" when defining why you hate schisms. But the reason that you maybe have these views on Islam is based on this "them" and "us" approach to thinking about it as a whole.
Because I know to Muslims, they are convinced, as Christians are, and I know it's not as straight cut, as clear forward as anyone would have you think. But how can you be so convinced of something 2,000 years ago that was passed down in vocal form through over a few number of years and finally written down by other people later on, right? Whereas at least in the Bible, the alleged authors of each of the books were technically meant to be the people who wrote them, right? That's one difference.
But in the sense that obviously the Old Testament existed before Christianity did, because it was part of Judaism. So you could say the same for Christianity. It's just a difference of the 600 years between 0 AD, when in theory Christianity came into being under Jesus, and 622, when Islam is formally recognized as starting under the Prophet Muhammad.
Yes, but to a Christian, Muhammad is irrelevant, okay? And yet, if I was to say that itself in certain hardcore countries who are strongly Muslim, that could, because they don't have freedom of speech like we do, that could be met with a death sentence under a particular mullahs. Right?
You say freedom of speech, but you look
Not
at
everyone has freedom of speech, buddy. Not everyone has freedom of speech. China doesn't have freedom of speech.
Firstly, I can understand what Ed's saying. Firstly, you'd have to... I personally would have no problem with you saying that to a Muslim or a Muslim saying the same thing about Jesus to you. But they would have to say, and this is where everyone gets freedom of speech wrong all the time, in my personal opinion and politely, I don't think that Muhammad is relevant, or I don't think that Muhammad is this. And they could say the same thing about Jesus, but it's the way you phrase it rather than, you know, what you're actually saying. That's where
absolutely. I absolutely agree with you. But we're setting a constraint for ourselves already by doing that, by saying, well, I can say what I want as long as I do it in a nice way.
Yeah, I agree. You know, I think that social media, Twitter's just become a killing den for anyone.
Is awful.
For anyone that says anything, it's immediately picking up on the negative points. I mean, Ricky Gervais, who I absolutely adore, said, I'm an atheist. I don't really believe in Christianity. To which a whole bunch of Christians came in and say, "Oh, this is terrible. This is shocking." And he goes, "Look, there are 3,500 religions in the world. You believe, in 3,499 less than I do. I just don't believe in 3,500 of them. You believe in one religion. What difference does it make if I don't believe in one less religion than you do? You know, it's just ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous, and nothing really makes any sense anymore because we're so free. We're we've been unleashed in so many ways from years of different ways of doing things. People are now fighting for the rights to have sex with cars and weird shit like that. You know what I mean? And it's just.
I think we'll stay away from.
All right. But listen, guys. We're going to have to wrap this up because Philly is going to be getting very angry with me.
Okay, so, just a couple more things, Nick. Just tell us a bit about your family and your daughter and how that all happened and came about. We'd really like to hear that.
I met a woman at the pub, and then I once heard on the radio someone saying, "You don't meet your wife at a pub. Who ever meets their wife at a pub?" Well, I met the fair lady who granted me a young soul at the pub through a mutual friend at the time, and we did click. We had a wonderful time for a long time, and she bore me a child out of wedlock, I confess. But one thing's led to another. I am very honoured to be a father. I feel my daughter has saved my life just by existing already about 3 or 4 or 5 times. And being a father, there's something supernaturally brilliant about having a youngster who looks up to you and you love and they love you, and it's just super. I'm
really glad for that, Nick. And literally one more thing, I'd like to do a super quick word association with you, if that's okay.
Is this so you can psychoanalyze my answers?
No. It's just honestly something that I just popped into my head right now that I really want to do.
Let's do it.
So, Catholicism.
Religion.
First thing that pops into your head.
Bond.
Okay. Sex.
Gross.
Drugs.
Waste of money.
Existentialism.
Too much hard thinking.
Samuel Beckett.
Never really studied it.
Finally, schizophrenia.
You got to know how to negotiate life to handle schizophrenia, pal. There was a thing at church that some went around for a while where it was, what would Judah? Okay, what would Jesus do? Right? That's a great thing. But when you've got schizophrenia and things like you're driving along in a car and it says, as soon as your car stops, your car's going to explode. Right? That's an everyday event for what I go through. Right? And you hear it audibly as someone in the car, but there's no one there, right? And so I've had 16, 20 years of this daily, okay? And so the joke is it's not always necessarily wubba-judda, but sometimes wubba-bubba-da, as in what would Bruce Willis do, right? As in like Die Hard. Seriously, my life has been like living a supernatural war against an invisible enemy.
Now I have a machine gun. Ha. Yeah.
Yes, but you say I don't have a machine gun because I can't shoot spirits, right? So I have to. Yippee-ki-yay, whoever you are, you naughty sausages.
Right. Last thing, Nick. If you could say anything to the audience watching about mental health, about drugs, or about religion, about any of the topics you've chosen, what would you like the parting gift of communication to be?
I shall leave it on a very brief quote, and it's all I can think of in my addled mind at this point in time. But if you want a world of love and peace, be love and peace.
Okay. Thank you very much, Nick. Nick's music will be linked in the description. He's a very, very interesting music artist, and we'd like to thank him here at the Verdict Podcast for coming in. He's provided a very entertaining and interesting performance. Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
My absolute pleasure, chaps. Thank you so much for including me, and may you have all the luck in the world from here on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
So So Ed, we just had Nick Clarkin. What did you think of that interview?
Very interesting. Some ideas that I'd class as very controversial towards the end. Well, depending on how it's edited towards the end. I personally feel like I don't agree with what he said at some points, but I guess it's down to personal discretion.
So what do you think about? Well, let's come to a verdict on his drug abuse. Do you think it has enlightened him and helped him to some extent, at the same time as being detrimental for his mental health? Or do you think it's just a chapter of his life that he should forget and just get on with it?
I don't know. I think you can make arguments for both. I think the way you phrased it, I think it alludes to you believing that it has sort of enlightened him to that extent. But I personally think when I listen to the stories and sort of like the schizophrenia that's given him, I can't really see an upside to any of it.
Well, I disagree. I think that it's something that's happened to him and he can't change it. And I think that what he should do is he is doing.
Obviously,
and,
it's in the past.
Yeah, and use it and harness it and use it to its benefit. And are there any other thoughts on the interview? Any moments you want to pick out that really stood out to you?
I think just personally, his stance on immigration was quite. It was interesting in the sense that I personally just think.
I was trying to work out if he was a racist or not, but I don't think he is. I think he just has.
I think he's coming from a place where he believes that Christianity is right, is his way of thinking, and maybe. I'm not saying it has, because he did have some very enlightened viewpoints through his faith, but I think sometimes it's better to look from the other side of the looking glass and say, okay, well, actually, how would they view this? And I think personally, immigration is one of those topics where it's always better to have somebody else's view on it, because that way you can build up this gradual sort of.
Any immigrant will tell you that the view is a lot different from the other side.
Yeah.
But I think that was a great episode. Thanks for co-hosting, Ed. Did a brilliant job. We here at the Verdict Podcast. We here at the Verdict Podcast care a lot about our listeners, and we want to hear from you. We want to hear about the episode. We want to hear if there's anyone else you would like us to interview. Any guests you have yourself that you'd like to send in, that is great. Please send in your questions for our guests coming up. We have a lot of amazing guests coming. And remember, Flamank Society is an amazing society. Ed has just vouched for it. £10 to be a member. The purchase is worth every single penny.
Every single penny.
We will see you next time. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.